Welcome to the Teach Joyfully podcast, where we talk about all things elementary teaching with some mom stuff thrown in. I'm Lisa Burns, a teacher success coach, veteran elementary teacher, and mom of 5. I'll be your host. Thanks for joining me today. Today's episode is sponsored by everyteachereveryday.org. Teachers, I know you're juggling a lot of plates this year. Every Teacher Every Day wants to make the juggling smoother for teachers with its new website available at zero cost. With a searchable database of free lesson plans and resources, Every Teacher Every Day provides a diverse community of wise and witty educators to engage with. I love the idea behind this website. It's easy to use and effective, and it's my favorite teacher price, free. You can join the community now by going to everyteachereveryday.org/teachjoyfully. Today, I have a special guest. She's a veteran educator with 20 years teaching experience, an author and the creator of PreK Pages, where she pours out her passion for equal access to high-quality early childhood education. Vanessa's smart, she cares deeply about kids, and she's on a mission to make teachers' lives easier. You're going to enjoy this conversation. Let's dive in.
Welcome to the show today, Vanessa. I can't wait for this conversation.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
Okay, well, let's just dive on in. So I know that helping teachers save time and provide outstanding opportunities for their students is something that we both value greatly. And really, honestly, it's something that all teachers want, right? We all want to save time. We all want to provide for our students, correct?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. And so this is something that you actually do with what you have in PreK Pages. So let's talk a little bit about your journey to PreK Pages, because you did not actually start out thinking, I'm going to build a business. I'm going to do all this stuff for teachers. That was never your goal. So how did you get started?
Well, that's a great question. And you are right. I never intended to start anything. I just... my school district one day back in 2000, they decided that it was one of their goals that all teachers would have a website the upcoming school year. So for the 2000 and 2001 school year or the year after, one or the other. And me being the type A person that I am, I said, when are you going to train us on how to make this website? Because it was tied to our teacher evaluation. So I always wanted to get the best teacher evaluation I could. So I wanted to make sure I had that website. And they said, oh, don't worry, we'll get to it, which in district speak means maybe we'll train you, maybe we won't, and it might not be this year. So I took it upon myself that summer before school started to learn how to create my own website. And I just did it. And that was kind of like my summer project. And the interesting thing is, Lisa, that no parent ever visited that website.
Well, and you know what? That was about the same time that a lot of us were busy trying to create teacher websites. And some of them turned into just teacher blogs. Some of them turned into various degrees of helpfulness. But I would say overall, we probably all felt the same, that very few parents, actually visited those websites because it just wasn't something that people were accustomed to doing.
Right. Absolutely. And the interesting thing was, not only did parents not visit it because they didn't really know about it or it wasn't a thing at the time, but teachers started to find it. And I started getting emails from teachers from different places, not near me or not people that I knew. And at first I was puzzled as like, how are they finding me? They were asking me teaching questions. And I was like, oh, okay. And so I kind of just rolled with it. And I just started putting content on that website that would answer teachers' questions, but it would also be helpful to parents in case they ever did stumble on it. So I just started creating little pages on the site with that information so that when I got those kind of emails, I could just point those folks to those pages with it was kind of like my version of a canned response.
Well, and there you go. That's exactly right. I think that we did things, one, because we were required to do them, and then two, it's like, okay, maybe it's helpful to me as a teacher. I think for me, it actually became a place for me to house things so I could easily access them if parents asked.
Mhm.
Even if I directed parents to it, they didn't really actually use it, but I could kind of a nice little filing system online, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it was just, it just started to snowball from there. People started to find the site. At that point in time, Google didn't really have a lot of content out there for when you search the word pre-K. So I kept popping up, I guess, in their searches. And then slowly over the years, somebody asked me, could I share something that I had written about on the website that I had created for my classroom? And I said, well, gee, I don't know how to do that. And it wasn't really a thing to create like a printable something to share with people. But I decided that after enough people asked that I would look into it. And so I was just giving them free downloads, basically, what we would call these days freebies or free downloads. And I started creating a few one-pagers. They weren't, by today's standards, they were horrible, but they were things that I actually used in my classroom. And people really liked those. And so fast forward another few years, and somebody one day asked me if I would create something or share with her something that she had read about on the website, and she wanted to pay me for it. And that really freaked me out because that e-commerce thing hadn't really taken hold in the printable world yet. We were buying things on Amazon at that point and a few things here and there on the internet, but it wasn't as predominant as it is today. And so it kind of freaked me out. And I was like, oh goodness, no. And somehow she wore me down. Teachers, we can be persistent when we want to. And so she wore me down, and I said, I don't know how to get the money. I don't know how that works. And she said, well, I'll just send you cash in the mail. So she sent me bills in the mail. It was a very low number amount. I think it was, I don't know, $8 or something like that. And so that was my first sale of a digital item, kind of. And it just snowballed from there. And so I said, well, maybe I could figure out how that works too. I figured out how to make something available online digitally. And so I said, maybe I can figure out how to take payment, because if she would pay for that, then maybe somebody else would. And, it was too much work to give it away for free. It was something that was really helpful. I think it was my assessments. And so I did. I figured out how to let people pay for something online. And it turns out they really liked that. And so that then turned into a whole other thing. Do you see how the snowball just keeps getting bigger and bigger as it rolls downhill?
Exactly. And, that's really how it happened for so many of us. Is we just started with something small and people liked it. And the next thing you know, it's turned into something bigger. And before you know it, it's snowballed into something. And we were piecemealing and patchworking our way through it because we didn't know. And honestly, a lot of people didn't know. Unless you were, really a techie kind of person, but we didn't know what we were doing. We were just fumbling around, trying to on our training wheels.
Exactly. And it was a lot of just trial and error, and it was a fun hobby. And I think that's something that people have to understand is like, I didn't say I'm going to do this because it's going to make me $1 million or anything like that. It was a fun hobby for me. I really like to learn new things. I like to be challenged. And every time I would figure something out online, I just felt this great sense of accomplishment. And it would inspire me to learn more. And so I just kept going with it. And obviously, things have changed so drastically in the last 10, 11 years. And it's grown into something I could never have envisioned even then.
Right. Yeah. And it's true. Your website is expansive because here's the thing is you started with something small and people liked it. And then you're like, well, okay, somebody asked for something else. And then you add that. And next then you start thinking of ideas before you know it. You're like, oh, well, I have all this other stuff I've created. Maybe I could just put that up too. And one thing leads to another, doesn't it?
Right. Absolutely. And I was making things all the time for my classroom because in the state where I was teaching in Texas, we had public pre-kindergarten, but the rest of the country at that time didn't have as much, where we had always had it for a very long time. So there just wasn't a whole lot out there for pre-K teachers. And so I made a lot of things for my own classroom using Word and PowerPoint. And, I would clean them up, make them pretty and make them sellable. And, the real versions, if you saw them in my classroom, are much more rudimentary.
Well, and sometimes they weren't even things, I know for me, that I created on a computer. They were things that I hand drew and figured out and then used. And then I had to go back and figure out how to create that actually using PowerPoint or Word and go back and do it later.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Totally.
Yeah. So, yeah, it's just, it's interesting how it all kind of has evolved, hasn't it?
Yes.
Now you have a wide range of stuff. So tell me, what is your mission with your business? Now that it's a full-fledged business and it's been that way for quite a long time, what is your mission with your business?
Well, I'd like to elevate the field of early childhood education. That's really our mission, and bridge the gap between K-12, because I think now in this day and age, the pre-kindergarten is much more common in many states. I know there are some that still don't have it, and I know there are some that don't have a lot of it, but it is coming. It will be here everywhere eventually, just like full day kindergarten didn't used to be a thing, and now everyone just about has it. So I really want to elevate the field and then also bridge that gap between K-12, because one of the biggest questions I always get is, do you have to have a degree to teach pre-K? And I'm like, yes, of course. I work in a public school district. I have to have the same, if not more, credentials than my K-12 peers, because I had to have English as a second language, and I had to have early childhood specialty as well. So sometimes I held more licensures than my neighbors that taught first, second, or third grade, down the hall. So yeah, I would really like to help bridge that gap, because a lot of folks tend to kind of lump pre-K into all the grades, but then at the same time keep them separate. And it's a very confusing time in the pre-K world for a lot of teachers, because they're separate, but they're not separate. They're equal, but they're not equal. It's very confusing. So I'd like to help bridge that gap.
Yeah. And I think it's an important gap to bridge, whether someone does former pre-K in a school, or, they do pre-K curriculum at home. I know a lot of homeschoolers probably use your curriculum. People do that, with their young children. They do a lot of work with their kids at home. I think it just makes that very accessible for people who maybe don't have that opportunity in their state or can't afford it because it's not free in their state. And it could be very beneficial for so many children.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that that's part of our mission, is to, by elevating the field, we want to make sure that people understand that it's not just, we don't just play all day. They're not just cute little chubby cheeked little beings that we get to play with. There's actually a lot of intentional thought and planning and skill that goes into teaching young children, just like there is with every grade level, right? Everyone has a skill set they need to have for the individual grade that they teach. And I think there's a lot of that. And I know for a fact that it's very difficult for a teacher who maybe has taught only grades 3, 4, and 5 to all of a sudden find themselves in pre-K. We get a lot of folks coming to us because they have been moved down, because in their school, all of a sudden they have pre-K, or they've just been moved down to pre-K. And they're like, I never knew it was like this. This is so hard. And that's one of the things that we can do, because I worked in a public setting for so long. I know exactly how to write lesson plans or activities or whatever to meet the needs of the students in front of me, but also the needs of the district. Your objectives, your learning goals or targets, your how to explain what children are learning through play to parents and administrators, all those things that are kind of extra that they might not teach you in college. Those are the things I specialize in.
Well, and I think that's really true when it comes to so many things, and especially one, learning through play and the importance of that, but also literacy. And I think those are things that they're so lacking at the college level. And it's not because they aren't trying. It's just because they don't necessarily understand what the teacher, boots on the ground, what their life is really like, and what that looks like now and what it looks like in 2 years from now. I don't think they stay in touch with that. And that, to me, I think is tragic, because how many of us have graduated college and gone into school, especially in that pre-K through second grade world, where some of those basic skills are so critical to long-term success and transitioning, you're right, from pre-K to kindergarten, and from kindergarten, which you also do a lot with, into first grade, are essential. Everything has to flow, and there's a progression of learning that has to happen.
Right. I've worked with a lot of new teachers over the years, and what's always fascinated me about it is if somebody does their student teaching in the spring, then they don't know what the beginning of the year looks like when they get their first job. And so much of what we do happens. We're setting the foundation in the beginning of the year, rules, routines, procedures, everything, expectations, everything. And if they don't get that and they come in as a new teacher, it can be a very big shock to their system. And I've worked with many teachers that's happened to over the years. And it's just a challenge that people are continually battling, along with the teachers who find themselves in pre-K after having taught other grades, or maybe having taken a break. A lot of teachers come back after having children, and their children get old enough to go to school, and they come back and then they get shocked. They get thrown into the deep end and like, wait a minute, this is nothing like I remember it.
Right, because things have changed dramatically. I remember when kindergarten was more like pre-K. And now pre-K's taken that rollover, and kindergarten's more like first grade used to be. And first grade's more like second grade. And there's just things have gotten shifted downward more and more. And it's not that kids can't do it, but I think that underscores what actually the next topic I want to talk about is the importance of learning through play, that these are still very little children. Yes, excuse me. Yes, our learning goals for these children might have changed a little bit, and we may have some higher standards and more things we want them to specifically learn, but they're still little children. And we need to approach it from play as opposed to pencil paperwork and sitting at a desk, because that is not age appropriate, even if maybe the skills themselves are.
Right.
Don't you agree?
Absolutely. And I think that we can teach a lot of things through play. And I think that's part of the skill that comes with being a successful pre-K and kindergarten teacher, is that we know how to teach these academic concepts in fun, in intentional, first of all, intentional, playful, fun, hands-on ways that get our students to retain that information, those academic concepts. And I think that's where the big disconnect is, because a lot of folks see learning as, maybe more paper and pencil tasks, or if they've taught an older grade or student taught in an older grade, well, this is how we figure out if our kids know what we've taught them, by doing these paper and pencil tasks. When in pre-K and kindergarten, that learning is much more fluid. It's much less about the actual end product, right? And it's more about the process and what they're learning as they go through the process, and how we actually have to know, in my opinion, how brains grow and develop. I really think that is very important for teachers of young children, how the young brain grows and matures over time. Because if we don't understand that, then we're constantly going to be trying to figure out what is it that I can do to make these kids learn, when in fact, maybe we're trying to do something that actually is not, their brain is not ready for in that form.
And I think that's so smart. Brain research has been something that I've been fascinated with for forever. I mean, it's just, it applies to education in every single aspect of everything that we do. And I think it's coming. It's not there yet, where really it's infused into everything that we do and everything we're taught in college. Whether it's undergraduate or graduate degrees, it really does need to be pervasive in everything that we do. And I think it's getting there, don't you think? But not quite all the way there.
I've seen a huge increase in the amount of information that's made more accessible to teachers. And that's kind of why I wrote my book, Teach Smarter, Literacy Strategies for Early Childhood Teachers, because I think that a lot of times we're told, right, here's your standards that you must meet, or here are the learning objectives or goals that you must do and follow. And I think that a lot of times our mature brain as adults says, okay, well, I need to get my kids to learn all uppercase and lowercase letters and letter sounds by the end of the year. So here's how we're going to do it. We're going to do the letter A. We're going to focus on that for however long that is, whether it's a day or a week. And then I'm going to tick that off my box and I'm going to go to the letter B. And then I'm going to do that for the day or a week. And I'm going to tick it off my box and go on to C. And then the brain research doesn't support that at all, because young children, they see print in the world all around them every day, right? I mean, odds are if you have a child who's 48 months old years old, or 48 months or 4 years old in your classroom, that child probably can point to a stop sign or a sign at a store like Target and say the name of it. So we have to just be very mindful that children learn these concepts differently than what may make sense to us as adults. And so it's very important to know that research, or to at least have some resources that you can go to, other than Pinterest. Pinterest is very visual and it's cute, but it doesn't translate always into research.
It's true. And that's the same with Teachers Pay Teachers. There's some very wonderful resources out there that are well done, but you do have to really look and evaluate, just like anything else, even things that come from publishers. You have to really look carefully and evaluate. Just because something's research based, it doesn't mean it's based on good research.
Yes, I like to say that my husband one time years ago said, I found a diet, honey. I'm going to go on this diet. It's going to be great. And I said, okay, what's it all about? And he said, it's a beer diet. And it was research based. I said, no, that's not really. So you have to be very careful about what kind of research we're talking about. But I thought that was a good example. Yeah, it doesn't always translate well.
Exactly. Okay, so before we get into some activities and some ideas of what it is that you might present to teachers as great activities to start with for play-based literacy learning, let's talk for a minute about that teacher who, whether they've been teaching a while or they're brand new, maybe they've been teaching a few years, they could be anywhere in there, but they have so many goals and so many things they're being required to teach, and they're overwhelmed. Teaching has become this pool of let's throw this in and then let's throw this piece in. Oh, that'll be great. And no one's thinking about what's really feasible and reasonable within the school day. And so teachers are overwhelmed. And so they feel like, I don't have time to play in my classroom. We've got things to do. So what would you say to them?
Well, first of all, I've been there and done that. I used to think every time they gave us a new thing that there was no way that I could teach that in addition to, right, what I was already doing, because I was already doing an impossible job and they just made my impossible job even more difficult. That I did used to think like that. But I think that one thing to keep in mind is that, once again, our adult brain is a little different. I like to think of that term thinking outside the box, right? So let's say, for example, I know when the whole social emotional thing just blew up, right? Especially around the pandemic. And teachers are now being tasked with dealing with children who've been traumatized or experienced trauma. And there's a big SEL push, social emotional learning. And teachers are like, I just don't have time to put another thing into my schedule. I think that especially when it comes to little children, we have to think about how we can infuse or sprinkle things throughout the day. So we don't need like a chunk of time for SEL. We don't need a chunk of time for this or that. It's infused into everything that we do. And that's how we can cover more ground at the early childhood levels. So, maybe you do some SEL when you greet your children in the morning, right? They can give you that high five, that handshake, that hug, or whatever it is that you've determined. You do a feelings check-in just as they walk in. Maybe you, sprinkle in a few things throughout the day so that you've got these bases that you're touching with your students, but it's not a 10-minute sit-down formal lesson, right? A lot of what we do in early childhood is like that. For example, fine motor skills. We're like, this is one I get a lot, Lisa, because teachers are told by kindergarten teachers who are told by first grade teachers who are told by second grade teachers, your kids must be writing full paragraphs by the end of the first 6 weeks in kindergarten, which is ridiculous. But if they don't have the fine motor skills to hold a pencil, that's not going to happen. So we're like, okay, now it's more important than ever that we develop our students' fine motor skills. So now I'm going to have a 20-minute fine motor skills block every day in my 2.5-hour class. That's not realistic. Instead, we can sprinkle fine motor skills into everything that we do. So our math manipulatives, our puzzles, all the things that we're having kids do, using glue bottles instead of sticks. That's a great fine motor skill. Beads and laces, some of the old school stuff that a lot of teachers don't always use these days. There were reasons why they were used. And beads and laces are one of them. That's a fine motor skill. Cutting with scissors is something we need to work up to, right? Playing with play-doh. That is why we play with play-doh. One of the reasons, there's many, but one of the reasons we play with play-doh is to develop the fine motor skills. All of these things that we do actually have a purpose. And that purpose, in this case, is to strengthen the small muscles in the hands and the fingers to hold a pencil so they can write that paragraph when they're ready. So I think that's really important to keep in mind, that we don't need a chunk and a chunk and a chunk and a chunk. And I know that so many districts, you need a 90-minute block of this and a 90-minute block of that. And then you're left with like, where do I put in SEL, or where do I put in fine motor, or where do I put in, gross motor or recess or anything? Your day is so packed. And I think that if we can think outside the box and find ways to sprinkle these things into our natural daily routines, it's so much easier to wrap your brain around.
I agree. And I think it's more doable. You really are working much smarter that way. The other piece of it is, who wants to learn SEL sitting down in a lecture?
Right.
How effective is that, right? But if you have sprinkled it throughout the day, in instances where it actually makes sense to students, where it has value, then suddenly it becomes part of the fabric of your classroom.
Right.
It becomes part of who you are as a class. It's part of your culture. And that's really what we're talking about. It's not, let's teach this in a little separate piece. It's not effective. It won't be effective. And that's why I think teachers get frustrated too, because they know it won't be effective. But when you do, like you say, sprinkle it throughout the day in meaningful ways, it suddenly makes a lot of sense. So going back to learning through play, and we take your Play-Doh example. So let's talk about how you can use Play-Doh for multiple purposes in one activity.
Oh my goodness, so many ways. I can use Play-Doh for anything. I mean, I've done Play-Doh mats for the alphabet, where their children are rolling the Play-Doh into little snakes and then forming the letters. They can use stamps in the letters and stamp their name. So many things like that. They can even spell words with Play-Doh and stamp words if they're in kindergarten. We've done sight words that way, all kinds of things. Math, rolling that number of balls, right? Let's say there's a cookie sheet on the table, like maybe even a mat that looks like a cookie sheet, and there's a little card that says, can you put 4 cookies on the sheet? And they roll 4 little balls and they put them on the little cookie sheet. They can make the number 4 with the Play-Doh. And then for SEL, I've even done little blank faces on the table, and can you make happy? Can you show me happy? Can you show me sad? Things like that. There's so many ways to use Play-Doh. And we're just kind of channeling that Play-Doh energy, that Play-Doh enthusiasm, right? Their interest in Play-Doh in making it a little more intentional. That doesn't mean that we tell them, okay, you can't play with it. They're still playing with it, but we're getting a little bit in there too at the same time and just following their interests that way. And it's so much more successful when we do things that way.
It is. You're getting all those fine motor skills at the same time. You didn't have to teach them separately. You're getting all of that tactile information, and it's a multisensory experience. I mean, you've attacked pretty much everything in one thing. And if you put a bunch of those out in one Play-Doh station and they go from place to place, now you've had SEL, you've had math, you've had language arts, and you had all these other pieces throughout. And I think it's brilliant. And I think that once teachers really start thinking about it and thinking in that vein, you realize not only is play effective, but it's fun, which the brain loves, and it's more memorable. And you got achieved all these goals in one activity. Talk about maximizing your time.
Yes, that is definitely teaching smarter instead of harder, because if we were trying to get children to learn those same concepts we just talked about using paper and pencil, it would be a harder sell, if you will, right? Can you hold this pencil in your hand and circle the happy face and circle the sad face or whatever? That's really not fun. And there's only one right answer to that, right? There's only going to be one happy face or one sad face. But when we're playing with Play-Doh, we can actually experiment and we can say, okay, I'm going to make the happy, and look, here's the sad too. Oh, look, here, this one's silly. It's more playful. It's a little more open-ended in that way as well. And they can use their imagination and their creativity. Because if you ask a child to make a happy face on a mat, everyone's going to look different, right?
Exactly. Well, and then it's fun to compare and contrast them. And I mean, you can just go on and on with it. I mean, it can be something you can make it as big or as small as you want, depending on what your time frame is at any given time. So yeah, I love that. I also love that it's so very memorable. Who remembers a worksheet, honestly? Right? Nobody, right? Nobody. And one of my youngest daughter is in high school, and she has one teacher who is the worksheet queen, is what we call her. And that's all they do. They do worksheets in her class. And my daughter's about ready to just keel over. And it's October.
Right.
And it's the class that should actually be really fascinating, and it's unfortunate. But that's her style, and that's what it is. And my daughter said, well, I will complete them all and I will get a good grade, but I guarantee there's not much I'm going to remember.
Right.
And that's, to me, makes me sad. It's so unfortunate. And it's true in the high school level just as much as it is true in the pre-K level.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
All right. Well, and now let's talk about give my listeners like 2 or 3 activities that they can do for just some literacy learning at the pre-K and kindergarten level right about now. You're talking about October, November. You've kind of got some things under your belt a little bit. What kinds of things can they start thinking about putting out where kids can learn through play that would be great activities? And I know you have a freebie, so you can talk about, maybe what's on that freebie list that you have that we're going to give to teachers.
Sure. I think that one of the questions I get asked right about this time every year, because things have started to settle a little bit, things take a little longer, the younger the children you work with, right? Longer for them to get into their routine, to feel comfortable, to get all those procedures down. So right about now, I get a lot of questions from teachers feeling panicky because they feel like their students aren't learning yet, because they see a lot of playing going on. It's still kind of chaotic. And they're like, well, my kids, they don't know all their letters or they don't know all their numbers. And I'm like, well, we've only been in school for X number of weeks. So I like to remind them that there are precursors to learning letters of the alphabet, to learning to identify letters of the alphabet, right? Because to see it with your eyes and to say the name of it, that is a skill, but they're actually precursors that have to happen before children can even begin to get there. And I think that's something, again, knowing about how young children learn and grow and how their brains learn and grow is so important. And so that precursor is visual discrimination. That means they were able to tell the differences in objects and symbols by sight. And the way they develop that skill is by touching, feeling, manipulating, and intentionally noticing letters. And that's where the teacher comes into play here. Because what we can do at that stage, especially for students in kindergarten who struggle, because in kindergarten, things go even faster, right? They need to know those letters much more quickly, but their students are a little older. So these types of activities I'm going to talk about now can really help skyrocket that letter identification, because we know that rapid letter naming has been proven to help those reading scores later. So the way I do visual discrimination is by inviting children to touch, feel, hold, and move magnetic letters. And so we like to do very simple letter sorts, is what I like to call them. T-charts. There's a lot of different ways you can do them, but it's usually a small group activity. We'll sit in a circle. You can do this with hula hoops. You can do it with cookie sheets. I like cookie sheets because the letters are magnetic. They stick to them. And we can just sort in the beginning with your students who are the youngest. Is it a K or whatever letter you've decided? Is it a K or not a K? That's like the first step. Is it or isn't it? And so we just play with the magnetic letters. We all get a chance to hold the K, feel it, talk about it's 3 straight lines. 1, 2, 3. See how this one goes down, and then this one comes over, and this one goes out. They can even make the K with their body. And now I'm going to put this K right here on my cookie sheet in this column that says K. And we're going to look at some other letters. And we're going to take these letters out of the bowl. And we're going to pass it around. We're going to feel all these other letters. And we're going to put the ones that are K right here and the ones that are not K over here. And we just take turns pulling the letters out, talking about the shape of the letter. Let's say someone pulls out the letter O. It has a hole in it. And I hold it up to my eye and look through it. Let me see the K. Does it have no, it doesn't have a hole. It only has straight lines, and the O is a circle. So it must go over here, right? And then we take turns doing that. And they can be really successful with that because they've been very intentionally noticing what a K looks like and what it doesn't look like. Now, my goal at the end of that lesson isn't for every child to identify the letter K like that, but it is to start noticing the shapes and how the shapes of the letters feel, and understanding that letters have names that are attached to those shapes. With those two things under their belt, understanding that letters have shapes, then they can name letters, right? When they have those things down, everything starts to go much more easily. And that's when teachers start to feel successful. So we can't grade ourselves or judge ourselves that our kids don't know all their letters after 6 weeks of school, because they may not have had those precursors yet. And every child is different, right? The number of exposures that they need to a letter in order to internalize that shape and that name of the letter are different. So you might do that activity with a group of kids, and 2 kids come out of that activity and they're like, they got K. They know K forever. You just taught them K. And the other 4 are like, I don't know what that was she talked about, but I did see some straight lines in there. You know what I mean?
Right. Exactly. Well, and you may have that child who has a K in their name. So they already knew K because
Right.
K was an important letter to them, versus the child who's never seen a K before or recognized a K before, not seen it because they've seen it everywhere. But, they haven't ever recognized, they haven't paid attention to it because it didn't seem important. It was wallpaper. It was background noise. It was on a sign. It was on a piece of paper in a book. And, they didn't pay any attention to that. But now all of a sudden that you've done that, now you have kids who are busy looking at all of these letters that they see everywhere in their world, and they're starting to notice things. Yeah. And once you've done 1 or 2 activities like that, don't you find that suddenly it just snowballs because all of a sudden they're aware?
Sure, absolutely. And another thing I like about those types of activities is that there's 26 letters in the English alphabet. So there's 26 ways you could do just that basic is it or not, is it not this letter? So, you could use your assessment data to determine, okay, well, this child already knows the letter K. Maybe they don't need to be doing this particular letter. You can target your instruction that way. But there's also other ways to sort them by holes, no holes, curvy lines versus straight lines, all different ways to sort them. And I think that the more you do of that type of activity, like the easier things will become. And they get to that rapid automaticity, that rapid naming of the letters much more quickly that way. But I think that because we feel a lot of pressure as teachers to get our kids learning those letters quickly, sometimes we don't feel successful and we miss the precursors maybe, or we don't spend as much time on the precursors because just that one activity probably isn't enough to teach kids, right? We have to be working on it multiple times over multiple weeks and months. And every child learns at a different rate. So we have to be very mindful of that.
For sure. And there's so many activities that you can do and varying levels. I mean, maybe they have all their letters and names, but they're ready for sounds. And I mean, there's ways that you can continue to progress using similar activities too. Then the kids are familiar with the activity, but now you've changed how the activity runs a little bit. You got it in a new factor or something. And I like to use like different kinds of magnetic letters. You have some that are spongy and soft and some that are, bigger and hard. You might have different shape, different colors, and you can mix a bunch of different Ks together. This one's green and that one's red and that one's purple. And now it's like, oh, but they're still K. How do you know they're different colors? And so you can kind of make that a little bit harder for kids just to make sure they have the actual shape down and they're not paying attention to something that maybe we didn't realize they're paying attention to, that it was, oh no, K's blue.
Right. Absolutely. And I think too, that going back to the magnetic letters, once kids can, name them, then like the next step in that visual discrimination is to start matching those letters. So that's where I see a lot of teachers take a misstep, is that they're like, okay, my kids need to start matching these letters, and they give them both upper and lower, and they ask them to match upper and lower. But again, we still have to go with the same, right? We have to match same to same. So we have to match those uppercase letters to each other first, because those are the easiest letters to identify, right? They have fewer hooks and curves and curls. So they're more straightforward. And so they're matching upper to upper. And so you can do that in a number of different ways. I like to hide the letters in a sensory bin of some sort, whatever filler you want, hide them in there. And then I give them a little cookie sheet with maybe like a piece of paper that I can tape on there, or something that will have the letters written on it. And they can take the letters out, the actual letters out of the bin, and put them on their sheet and match them to the shape of that letter. So they're matching same to same. And then we
almost like a puzzle.
Yeah. And once we've got that down, we can move on to matching lower to lower, right? Because those are much more tricky, right? Yep. And only then can we move on to matching upper to lower, because they don't always look alike, right? The uppercase E versus the lowercase e, completely different. So I think that we have to be very mindful of the way that they acquire the knowledge, and stagger our activities or parcel them out to follow the way that they actually learn these skills. Because I see a lot of teachers say, I tried that. My kids cannot match upper to lower. Well, did you try upper to upper first, or lower and then lower to lower and then upper to lower? And because we take for granted, right? We're adults, and breaking that learning down isn't something we think about, because think about the last time you learned your letters. How old were you? A long
and do
time
you even and do you even remember? No. I think most of us don't even remember learning to read, much less, learning our letters. Some of us have clear memories of certain points in time, but, it's not something that most people actively remember doing. And it's like anything in teaching. It's hard to remember what steps are really important and where kids can get tripped up. And sometimes you have to just try things and then you notice and you think, oh, whoops, okay, tomorrow we're going to do this differently, because that's what teaching is. You're going to catch yourself and say, oh, okay, forgot about that. That's going to be a little harder. Or maybe it's just this particular class is having trouble with that step and you need to break it down a little smaller. And I think you figure it out as you go sometimes. But I also think that when we're working on these activities and doing them, we need to remember it's better to go slow because then later we can go fast. Yep. And you have to slow down first before you can go fast. You got to walk before you can run. I know there's some children who run before they walk, but they are few and far between. And the reality is we all need to crawl and then walk and then we can run. But once we get all the basics down, and if your base is solid, and that includes things like phonemic awareness and letter naming and all these little pieces and parts, then you can start to really run. And they will learn to read so much faster and more accurately, and they'll enjoy it more if you have taken the time to lay the foundation. Is that not what you have found as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's so much easier to roll a boulder downhill than it is to push it up. And a lot of these things that you and I have been talking about are the ways to push that boulder downhill. Because once you've taught them how to visually discriminate those letters, right, it's going to make learning go much more quickly. So I know that at the end of your tunnel is looming that goal, right? They must know all upper and lowercase letters. They must know all upper and lowercase letters. And in the beginning of the year, especially in pre-K, it's not uncommon for children to come in not knowing any letters. So it can seem like an impossible task in addition to all the other things you have to teach. But again, like you said, if you go slow, things start to really go fast later in the year when they mature and they're ready for some of these things. Nobody ever said they have to recognize all upper and lowercase letters by the end of the first 6 weeks in pre-K. They never said that. It's an end of the year goal, and there's steps that we have to take to get there. And this is just one of those steps that I think will set both you and your students up for success instead of failure.
That's right. And those kindergarten teachers will thank you in the end, because I can tell you, having taught kindergarten, I can tell you, I have had so many children come in, even having had pre-K sometimes, who have come in and they don't know all their letters and sounds in kindergarten. They maybe have some of them, but they don't have all of them, because not all of those steps have been taken, and they started doing pencil paperwork way too soon instead of doing some of these other things. And I think even in kindergarten, we really need to think about, very intentionally, how can we make this as tactile and as playful as possible so that the brain will retain the information. It's not that these kids never heard it. It didn't stay.
Right.
Yeah. So wonderful. Well, okay. So let's talk for a minute about what kinds of things you offer on your website. You have pre-K pages, and what kinds of things do you offer to teachers on your website?
So we have a wide array of digital downloads, everything from math and literacy to fine motor and science as well. These are all things that I've created myself. They've all been designed by me. They have their learning objectives in there. They've got your setting, whether that's small or whole group. They've got your materials lists. They've got step-by-step directions. That's one of the things that our teachers really love, is that it doesn't matter if you've been teaching for a day or a year or 20 years, you can take our things out and you will have everything at your fingertips that can walk you through how to do this plan or activity that are very concisely explained. So I think that's one of the things that our people really like. So we have all of those, probably close to 400 different printable digital resources available there. And then we also have our membership site where I mentor teachers as well, pre-K teachers and preschool teachers. And I do not just the printables. They get the printables when they join, but they get coaching by me. So we have more than 70 hours of on-demand video training available to them. So if they want to know the why behind the what, right? Like we just talked about, like why do we have to learn all 26 upper and lowercase letters, and how do we do it? That's what they get inside. So we have trainings on a multitude of topics, and they're available on demand for teachers to walk there. We also do professional book studies in there as well on professional books of interest to early childhood teachers, specifically for early childhood, because that's one thing I used to do at the district level was conduct the book studies. And I found that a lot of other school districts out there or private schools don't do that for their pre-K teachers. They do it for the other teachers until the pre-K teachers just follow along. Or they don't do it at all. And so we found that our teachers really enjoy being led in professional book studies so that they can think and talk about these concepts that are out there that they may not have, had time to do on their own, or they may not have had time to think critically about them if they did read them. So that helps them absorb and retain the information in these books. And so we do that. We have an annual event that we do, the Sort of Success Summit for early childhood teachers. That's virtual. It's always been virtual. Before COVID, we were always virtual since 2018. So we do a lot of things over there. But the hub is pre-kpages.com.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And you have a freebie for teachers. It is Literacy Essentials. It has tons of great stuff, including links to get to everything that you need. So we'll put that up on the show notes as well. And there's a couple other links that we have for you. So we'll throw all that into the show notes so teachers can find you. They can find everything that they need in order to get started. And I love that you're providing not just lessons and things, but also professional development if teachers really want that, because sometimes, it helps us, one, to grow and change, but it also helps us to feel confident in talking to parents and in talking to our administrator about why it is we need to do it this way and standing up for what we really believe in. And I think that is empowering more than anything else. So thank you for what you do.
Well, thank you. I've enjoyed talking with you. It's always great to talk with somebody who's as passionate about education as I am. So thank you for the opportunity.
So that's it, my teacher friends. We're out of time and I'm out of breath. Thanks so much for joining me today. You can find the link to Vanessa's free Literacy Essentials Guide and all the links mentioned in this episode on my website at www.hopeineducation.com/podcast. If you liked today's episode, I'd love it if you'd go to Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen and leave a review. And while you're there, hit the subscribe button so you'll never miss an episode. Also, you can continue the conversation online with me in my Facebook group, the Teach Joyfully podcast community, where elementary teachers can connect, get help, and encouragement for all kinds of education and parenting topics. And as always, you can grab all my freebies in the vault at www.hopeineducation.com/vault. And remember, a happy teacher is a good teacher. Until next time, teach joyfully and take care of you.